That I came, and Charlotte, we actually met in College Republicans, and my husband also, we met in College Republicans, and it was not a very popular time to be a conservative on campus during the Obama years, and we were bullied incessantly, and we had to fight campus. They actually brought Bill Ayers, a literal terrorist, on campus, and we had to fight, and we brought Ann Coulter on campus to combat that. And we had protesters, and it was a really difficult time, but we kept pushing for what we believed in. And then when I went to run for student body president, I was about a year into remission from my cancer, and was battling hard and wanted to represent on campus. And if you look up the Laramie and the UW Branding Iron magazine or the local paper here, they continue to bully me incessantly about being a conservative. How dare you run for student body president of UW and be a conservative? And we continue to push on that fight, and I know we've got folks from Turning Point that are here doing that same thing on campus. So I'll go back a little bit about my origin story. So I grew up in a 6th generation Wyoming ranching family. My family was in the Torrington area in the late 1800s. And then when my grandfather was young, they moved just west of Casper. And they came and they had a half a section of land, and they had a 2-room shack with no electricity and no running water. And they built that into over 8,000 acres, into a running ag operation, and they put everything they had into the land to build something greater than themselves. And then I grew up outside of Casper and watched my parents crawl their way into middle class. And so if your family was like mine, you grew up recognizing that you don't wait around for the government to fix your problems. You dig in, you work hard, you put everything you have into building something bigger for yourselves, for your family, for the next generation. And you expect your elected officials to fight like hell when the government starts to encroach on your rights and your liberties. And that's the background that I come from. And when you look what's happening across our country and what's at stake right here in Wyoming, number one, what we have got to continue to fight for are conservative values here in Wyoming. And that no matter what happens in other states, that we are protected right at the border. And we have to have strong leaders that are willing to step up, make the tough decisions, and fight for our values. We have a literal socialist who was just elected as mayor of New York City, the largest city in America. We have boys wanting to play in girls' sports. We have literal pornography that we have had to rid out of the public school libraries. And we have a Supreme Court in the state of Wyoming who just deemed abortion as healthcare. That should scare every one of us. That's what's at jeopardy in the state of Wyoming. And that's why I'm running for governor. Because we need strong leaders that are willing to fight back against these liberal influences that threaten our state and across our borders. And that's why I'm proud to be endorsed by President Donald J. Trump, as well as Congressman Hageman, because we need winners. We need winners that can get the job done and that will step in and be able to run this state and make sure that we protect our conservative values. I'm running for governor because we need a strong economy in the state of Wyoming, and we need to double down on things like our mineral industry and fossil fuel industry. This is the industry that I spent my career in. When I came back from grad school, I started my career in the coal industry, lived up in Gillette. And then that was during the Obama years as well, during the Clean Power Plan, when he threatened to destroy our livelihood of the coal industry. And then most recently, before I was superintendent, I worked in the oil and gas business. I'm 3rd generation in my family to work in the oil and gas business, because these are the industries that fuel, that power our country and our world. And that's what we need to double down on in Wyoming. We need a governor that recognizes how the industry works and how we will fight for further development. Because look, folks, we've got a state that is about half the surface, a little under half the surface, and a little over half of the subsurface owned by the federal government. If we don't have leaders that are going to come to the table and have experience sitting across from the BLM, negotiating with them, then we don't have an economy, because our fossil fuel industry is what generates the revenue in this state. It also means that we got to figure out ways to keep our youth here in the state of Wyoming. I'm sick and tired of the young generation leaving the state. We need to have great, high-paying jobs in the state of Wyoming. We need to ensure that the cost of living is low. That means low property tax, low personal tax burden, so that your kids can be here, can thrive, can start a family, and continue to build future generations here in the state of Wyoming. I'm also running for governor because we need a stronger education system, and this is what I've been working the last several years on. And I want to take a moment, I do want to especially recognize Chairman Andrew. He has been a tireless advocate in our quest for reforming the education system. Being able to partner with him as the state superintendent on the executive branch with the co-chairman of the education committee has been huge. And we have created historic change when it comes to education. So please, just a round of applause for him. Because at the end of the day, nothing really matters if we don't have an education system that is preparing our future workforce and to be strong American citizens. We have to do better in making sure that our youth are growing up knowing skills to be able to fill jobs and that they're growing up with a love for America. We actually just launched today, earlier in Cheyenne, our new Wyoming Patriot Schools program, where we are going to designate schools as Patriot schools and recognize efforts that schools are doing to advance civics education and patriotism in our classroom. But when it comes to education, what I've really focused on in the last couple of years are creating historic school choice, ensuring that parents have a choice when it comes to their child's education. Every child learns differently, and they should have options when it comes to education. It's been about doubling down on career and technical education, our skilled trades. Those are the folks that are filling jobs in our communities, and we've got to prepare our students and give them those pathways instead of shoving them into college where it might not make sense for them or for our economy. And we focused on literacy, making sure that our kids, because kids can read by the 3rd grade, because right now we hover around only 50% of our kids are reading at grade level by the 3rd grade. We have work to do. We've improved, but we've got work to do. And then we focused again on patriotism in the classroom, doubling down on making sure that our kids grow up with a love for America. And it turns out when you focus on these things, when you focus on the right things like creating choice, when you focus on career technical education, rising tides raise all boats. And while we had to fight like hell against the opposition on things like school choice, guess what we had this year? We've seen statewide, overall, increases in performance on our state assessment in all 3 content areas. 2 of the 3, we've seen increases that are back to pre-pandemic levels. That's what happens when you focus on the right things, you do the right things. And then last, I want to focus on innovation. We've got to be a more forward-thinking, leading state. Frankly, I'm sick and tired of hearing that we're 20th on the list to sign on to litigation, or that we are just waiting to see what other conservative states do before we jump on board. We need to be bold. We need to have leaders that are going to take charge, make tough decisions, and are going to take risks to do that. We also need to make sure that we're running state government more like a business. After the last several years, after running one of the state's largest agencies, I can tell you we got significant work to do. We need to make sure that those state agencies are more nimble. We don't have just layers and layers of bureaucracy. And that's what I've really strived to do as superintendent and leading the Department of Education. And we need to make sure that in all that we do, we're thinking outside the box for different industries that we can attract and the ones that really support our mineral industry. When we talk about economic development, I'm interested in the companies that have a indirect support or direct support of our mineral industries. We need to focus on what we're good at and really efficiently do that in every part of government. And so those are the 3 things I really want to focus on. Conservative values, energy and economy, education for, and innovation. I think I can count as superintendent. But truly, I think our best days are really ahead of us, but we have to come together and we have to recognize what we need in this state, and we have to stand up and not be scared to promote our conservative values in all that we do. And so with that, I want to spend less time talking, more time listening to all of you, take questions and hear what's on your mind, particularly here in Albany County. We can win Albany County back. We can bring Laramie back to where it should be, and that's the color red and not blue. And so I'm anxious to hear how I can help to be a part of that and appreciate all that you're doing here in Albany County. So with that, I would take any questions. Yeah.
Yes, my name is Rick Martin, and I reside in precinct 45-1. And my question is, if you're elected governor, who would you appoint as Attorney General? Give you an example. I have filed multiple allegations of election code violations with the Secretary of State, and those have been forwarded to the AG's office and went nowhere. I believe we need a watchdog in the AG's office, not a lapdog. Can you please share with us who you would consider appointing? Thank you.
Yeah, great question. And I agree with you. And I don't have a name right now to give you. Haven't gotten that far. I need to win this race first. But I'm with you completely. And I want an AG, I want an AG's office that knows so well what I stand for, what I believe in, that I've got an amicus brief on my desk the next morning. We don't have to be waiting, because I, like you, have in several circumstances been knocking on the door to get lawsuits filed, to jump on lists, to make sure that we're operating as we should be in the AG's office. We've recognized too on our state land board, we've run into that as well, that so much, I don't think we recognize how much, whether it's the AG, whether it's thousands of people that serve on boards and commissions across the state of Wyoming, unelected folks that are making decisions, policy decisions for the future of the state. And when you have that kind of power by the governor, you need to make sure it's someone who are going to put fighters. I want bulldogs in my office. That's what I want. Head of every agency, including the AG's office. So I don't have a name right now, but I share your concerns. I share your anger about that, particularly when it relates to mineral development and when we push on the feds, because we've got to have a fighter.
Thank you.
My name is Chuck Ignazik, and I taught at UW for 4 years, that bastion of communism. I live in the humanities area, okay? And yes, it's area if you come from New York. So I can attest to the fact that in humanities at UW, there is 0% accountability. Because these people, like in so many other programs, are academics. They're not professionals. All they can do is tell you, here's how you get into graduate school. How about this? Here's how you can get into a gallery. Here's how you can, sign contracts and so on. There's nobody there. And they've been doing this for decades. What is your solution, Degen?
Well, it all...
Accountability.
Great question, and I echo many of those concerns. And look, it all starts from the top. Let's not forget that the UW Board of Trustees is appointed entirely by the governor. And so once again, back to the first question, who do you have on all these boards and commissions? And you have folks that understand the economy and are less worried about the world of academia and more focused on the land grant mission of the University of Wyoming. That's what we're meant to do. We are meant to help churn this economy, make sure that kids are prepared for the real Wyoming jobs, what the businesses are that fund the university. That should be our focus. And so I'm not really interested in some of these feel-good degrees that we have. If you're not aware, I was full steam ahead on banning DEI from the University of Wyoming. Now, I sat in some of those meetings, and the way people looked at me, it was as if I had 10 heads. Because they think, you're taking away DEI, you're taking away diversity and all of this, feel good, having students be supported. That's not what we're talking about. We are talking about anti-American. We are talking about teaching kids to hate one race over the other, and that should be nowhere near our public institutions. Luckily, with the help of the legislature, we banned DEI out of public institutions. But it starts from the top, and making sure that that's the environment under which the university is going to operate. I'm hopeful of our new UW president. I have met him, and I'm excited to see what he can bring. But I think honing into that land grant mission, there is nothing wrong with that. And then remembering who pays the bills. I had folks that used to be on the trustees say, well, what's the big deal? It's just a bunch of legislators that are concerned. So those are your appropriators who have been elected into office by the people that they represent, and they are funding the majority of this university. It should be beholden to the wishes of the state of Wyoming.
Thank you.
I'm one of those unelected people who make decisions. Chairman of the Laramie Planning Commission. What do you think the SLIB, I think they've wasted a lot of money on feel-good projects, state loan investment board. They finally have done something for biotech, but one of the problems that WAM, Wyoming Association of Municipalities, ignores completely is most of our cities are short on infrastructure. We don't have the money in the cities to pay for it. For one reason or another, they've wasted a lot, and well, they've pissed it away. But can the SLIB be reoriented to start pumping money into cities and municipalities and counties for infrastructure?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the role of government, right? And I think we got way off track here. And it starts with the Wyoming Business Council that then brings requests to the SLID board. And we need major reform on the Business Council, because what we spent way too many years doing is kind of sprinkling fairy dust around the state, some of these feel-good projects that are fun, splash pads, you name it, and not addressing the infrastructure needs of our local communities. That is the role of government, so that businesses can then come in, can build their infrastructure, and they can thrive. And that's really where we need to refocus. And we've been starting to have a lot of those conversations. I think, again, it starts with Business Council board appointed by the governor. Sorry to keep harping on that, but that's the importance of what we're doing here, and then why I'm running for this office. And so talking more about those water projects. I think you could probably take the entire Business Council budget and use it on water projects across the state. I think those county consensus grants, we started to talk, Speaker Nyman brought that up in this last session, didn't make it through the Senate, but looking at how we fund projects where communities can come together for infrastructure needs. Again, that's the role of government, that's what we should be focusing on.
Thank you, Mrs. Degenfelder. My name is Reese Robertson, and I'm a student at the University of Wyoming. So, issue that I would like for you to answer about Gen Z is right now around the country, and especially in red states like Texas, we're seeing a big problem with H-1B visas right now being used to undercut American labor. And we know multiple friends of ours who went in to get computer science degrees, go into IT and tech, but then they get their job taken away from an H-1B visa, and we're not seeing the federal government step in to do this, especially with Wyoming trying to take on the data centers going on right now. So what would you do as governor to ensure that big tech and little tech can't undercut American labor?
Interesting, yeah, that I'm really interested to hear that, and I'd love to hear more too on it.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's some of that I think we need to work with our federal partners as well of how that process works, because I think that's limited a little bit on the federal level. But look, we got to take care of our Wyoming kids and our Wyoming students first, and that we shouldn't apologize for that. I think there's so much apologizing for that, and again, we have to make room for everyone. We have to. It's all this feel-good things with DEI and you name it. And really, it's about keeping our kids in the state of Wyoming, and that can turn into a crisis for the state of Wyoming. The average age of Wyoming just keeps creeping up. We need our youth to be here, we need them to thrive here, and we need them to have those jobs. I also think the role, so a lot of that's on the federal level when it comes to the visas, but when you talk about who's leading the state, it is bringing these companies to the table and say, if you want in, especially if you're gonna get funding from the state, you play by our rules. And these are what the rules are gonna be. And that's how I plan to interject in that sense. So thank you for the question.
Thank you.
My name's Taylor Haynes, and I live in the county. I live in 2 counties. You mentioned civics, which is very important. So if you're going to teach civics, are we going to teach the kids that we are a republic? And if we are a republic, the federal government doesn't own anything in Wyoming. And I've been down that road, but didn't get to the end. And the federal employees know that they don't own anything here. So as governor, will you simply take over the land that came to Wyoming when we became a state? And all you've got to do is send the letters that you are assuming management. These lands are federally managed. They don't own a damn thing outside of 10 square miles of Washington, D.C., period. Thank you.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And I've been fighting this for a while, because the problem is we don't have state management of these federal lands. Decisions are not being made here in the state, they're being made federally. And then even when we get a friendly administration, the Trump administration's been incredible, but it still took many months because you had these BLM field staffers. If you've ever dealt with the Bureau of Land Management folks, oh man, let me tell you, they make it their job to just stop development a lot of the times. And so by the time it even trickles down to them, it can be difficult. Now we're a year into the Trump administration trying to get things up and running. I'll bring up one issue that we dealt with on the state land board, and it was around the Kelly parcel. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's a parcel of land outside of Jackson, the most pristine views of the Grand Tetons. And we had a decision to make, because the feds, Department of Interior, said our #1 priority is to get this parcel. And so what I was bringing up, and actually working with some geologists out of Casper, and actually the state BLM field office, we were putting together a package deal where we could essentially get 100,000 acres for the like-for-like value of the Kelly parcel, okay? And fortunately, thank you, Secretary Gray, he was on the right side of this, that we tried to do a swap instead of a flat sale, giving them a sweetheart deal to the federal government. But unfortunately, the majority of the state land board made the decision to sell it for pennies on the dollar. And so now that parcel is gone forever, and we have increased the ownership of federal lands in the state of Wyoming through that process.
That's Tom Schmidt. To go along with what Taylor said, the law to do this was passed in 2015. It's in Title 39. It was sponsored by Kermit Brown, and then he voted against it. But it's on the books in the Wyoming statutes. But the thing I want to bring up is that we just appointed this guy named Reeves to be the president of the university. Did nobody vet this man? He sponsored DEI programs at West Point. He wrote a paper called The Problems of Whiteness in the Military. So we got a wokester at the university president. Maybe that won't come out, but that's what he has done. That's what he did. So you can check it out.
I will 100% do that. I appreciate that. That's a problem. Go ahead.
Accountability and responsibility are two very important things that are near and dear to the heart of all of the conservatives in this room. But under your leadership at the Department of Education, there has been some major data breaches that have occurred recently that puts a lot of people's private information out there, and I sure hate to see that happen in the position of a governor, and I'd like to know what you have to say about that and what you're doing to support the parents that have been victimized by that.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. So just so folks are aware, so we've kind of been in this year-long battle with the school district in Rock Springs. We had, over the course of a year, many concerns that were brought up by parents that the school district was not complying with federal special education law, that they were being combative with parents. The list went on and on. You might have seen too that one of their teachers there showed a nude photo of herself during classroom time with special education students. Really, really bad things going on there. And so instead of looking the other way, I took it head on. And we've been up against that school district for the better part of a year. I actually launched an investigation of the district into their special education practices. It has been wildly unpopular, and the district has really been very reactive in a very negative way. I think showing that they do have things to hide because they are more concerned with suing myself as well as the parents than they are addressing these special education issues. So we've been battling them for a while. So what occurred recently is that when they then asked for a public records request of all complaints from parents, because they claim that parents, it's not that many parents that are making these complaints. So they made this public records request, and our administrator at the Department of Education released information that should have been redacted regarding parent names and, in one case, student information. And so this is a grave mistake. It's something that we have zero tolerance for. And so I acted right away. I'm not going to tell you that a mistake's never going to happen in government, because that'd be a lie. And I'm not going to tell you that a mistake that happens from a staffer defines a leader. But what I am going to tell you defines them, and what you can do in state government is it's how you handle the situations and how you fix them. And so what I immediately did, we reprimanded that individual. They've been relieved of stripped of all of their public records duties. And we're looking at a completely new process at the Department of Education, how we ensure that we have those proper protections in place. And I called that parent immediately, spoke to the parent of the child, had a great conversation with her. And so that's how we move forward. And honestly, here's the problem with government, federal level, state level. You have a lot of elected officials that just sweep it under the rug. And they pretend it doesn't happen, they kind of move that person out. I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna own it, which is what I've done in this situation and probably why you're hearing about it. And I'm going to tell you that there's a problem, and I'm going to fix it, and here's the solution. And that's what we need out of leadership. Because when you're running the entire state and these state agencies, those are going to happen. It's how you respond to them and how you make sure that you're taking care of people moving forward. Yes?
Yes, I was going to ask you about the savings and loan.
Speak up, please.
That y'all were meeting about the other day, and you didn't know whether they should let illegals participate on that or not? Is that not what your question was?
No. So no, I agree completely with the premise and what we're gearing up towards. It's making sure how do we effectuate that and who has responsibility of verifying that. And so I've already started, actually have met with the Trump team and I'm talking to HUD about the process and how we can effectuate it here in the state of Wyoming. So whether that will be with the grant recipients or whether that will be with the Office of State Loan and Investment. And so that's what we're figuring out right now, thus tabling it, and then we're going to be discussing it here in a couple of weeks. And so I think hopefully we can make sure we have the right language and get it put into place. The discussion was about some of these housing projects. So we had $5 million appropriated by the legislature to fund unmet housing needs. And so the discussion is around ensuring that we have only U.S. citizens, legal U.S. citizens that are able to benefit from these projects. And so that's what we're working on right now.
Another question. Your husband is in the medical field, and when somebody ignores the privacy of a patient, they get charged, okay? So why is this person not being charged of releasing this information? You know, like in HIPAA, they charge you for that?
Well, I don't know the answer to that. I'll look into that. I mean, I think we've got different laws going with HIPAA and then the public records requests. But I can certainly look into how those are different and get back to you.
When the communist filth, the media, points out that you received a master's degree from communist China, how are you going to respond to that, Megan?
Yeah, great question. I think more people should experience what it's like firsthand to see the atrocities of communist countries today in 2026. And I lived it. And one thing that you should know about me is I jumped down the throat of the lion. I want to know my enemies because that's who you got to take on. And so let me tell you something about China. Let me tell you what it's like to live in China. I tried to go to a Christian church, had to show my passport to prove that I wasn't a Chinese national, because national citizens cannot practice freedom of religion in China. The Bible blocked off the internet. You got to bring it with you. Historical events blocked. People just walking in lines, obeying orders, and not even second guessing it. Education system, where you have a special education child with Down syndrome that a teacher took and shoved into a corner and made him touch his nose to the corner for an hour. Kids lined shoulder to shoulder, referred to by numbers. Because I substituted in a classroom of high school students and I said, how do I know, their names? And they said, just call out a number. That's what's happening, literal genocide in China. And so I think knowing that, understanding that, living that, gives you a different perspective. And if you've experienced something like that, then you realize that. It shows you what we have in America and what is at stake here if we're not careful. Because we have generations that haven't had to fight for anything. And we need to ensure that they are willing to step up and protect America and the freedoms that we have here. Because I'm telling you, they're at stake. And actually, I think everyone should experience that once in their life.
Thank you.
There's probably time for one or two more questions.
Okay.
Two things. This article that Tom Schmidt was talking about, Shane Reeves, it's written by the MacArthur Society of West Point graduates. It's entitled, "Until President Trump Fires Woke Leadership, West Point Will Never Get Back to Forging Warriors." It was published June 12, 2025, and it names Shane Reeves as calling him to account for what he's done to West Point. That's who our new president.
With DEI, specifically with DEI.
So if you're looking for the article,
Yeah,
it's West Point, MacArthur Society, West Point graduates. Now I have a question for you.
Yep.
So you're probably not aware, maybe you are, that the University of Wyoming land holdings prevent Albany County from receiving about $4.2 million a year in tax revenue. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the University of Wyoming, since 2003, has not given any money to the city for fire suppression services, EMS services, or police services. Although they have their own police department, they still require city police. And it costs the city of Laramie, between taxpayers, between $100,000 and $150,000 a year. Do you think that's fair that the taxpayers are paying for the university to get a free ride with EMS services, police services? They're not providing to the infrastructure of the city. And so what would you as a governor do about that?
Yeah, and I'd love to dig more into that exactly and the specifics. I know also the stormwater drainage issue was a big one as well. And that push and that burden was going to be on the people in Albany County. I mean, we're already paying, taxpayers are already paying for the University of Wyoming. And so we can't allow our constituents here who are then
But
supporting it.
That's not true. They could put a tuition fee on a student fee. If you get $100 a year, a semester, for every student that goes to the University of Wyoming, that would be $1 million a semester that the university could give to the city of Laramie. Wouldn't cost them a penny because it's on the tuition fee, taxpayers wouldn't have to foot a dollar.
Well, and sorry, where I was going with, the taxpayers in Wyoming are already paying the university, so you shouldn't have to do it twice. And that's part of the problem, and so I'd love to dig deeper into that and see what we could do, because that worries me that it's on you double, is what I mean. You're already paying for the University of Wyoming, and then on top of that, in terms of services. So would love to visit after a little bit more.
All right, that's Megan's turn. Let's give her a hand.